It's great to have Jennifer Martino here now. Jennifer is the executive director at the Crouch Resource Center for the humanitarian outreach, is the way that I like to put it. Resource centers have libraries in them, all sorts of different things, but they've also done such a great job at reaching out to communities in need, and I know you're heading all of that up, Jennifer. How long have you been there? Is it 3 years?
It'll be 3 years on December 9th. I started in December of 2019. And I overlapped with the executive director, Margaret Wills, for 2 months, and then the pandemic came.
And then the pandemic, and I remember seeing you near the beginning of the pandemic when we were doing some initiative together, and I remember feeling sorry for you, that you just kind of went into the deep end right away. Was that a tough experience, or did it make you kind of battle-hardened early?
Yeah, I was very fortunate because before Crouch, I worked at United Way, so I was familiar at least with the other organizations in the community. I had some people I could reach out to for support and some mentorship. And also, Crouch has such a strong reputation already in the community and a solid team. And I found that we just did what we had to do to keep serving people and stay open, and all of the staff were willing to jump in and do what it takes. And so it was a powerful experience in terms of starting off with a bang, that's for sure.
No, that's right. Jennifer, why don't you take us through a bit of what it is that Crouch offers? I know we as a food bank partner with you to some degree on a mobile food initiative, but you do so much more. So why don't you just take us through what you offer? I do think, if memory serves me right, you help people with food on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday during the day, correct? You have a meal. Is it on Fridays? Like a lunch? Thursday, okay. So that's, I know a bit more, but that's about it. Why don't you fill us in on all that you do, because it's amazing.
Sure. We do have a focus on basic needs because there is a great need for food, hygiene items, clothing, and support accessing social assistance, support with filing income tax within the Hamilton Road neighborhood. It is a wonderful neighborhood, a historic neighborhood, really strong sense of community. Also, the reality is that there's a 27% lower average income level in Hamilton Road than there is in the city as a whole. So there's certainly needs there. But at the same time, the people who access the basic needs services are volunteers. All of our basic needs services where we engage volunteers, those volunteers live from within the neighborhood. And they've most often come to us through things like the community food cupboard, and then they said they wanted to give back. And we've also been working really hard in the last year to incorporate art and culture and community building into basic needs activities. And I like to say that people aren't plants. We can't just water them, give them some fertilizer and expect them to grow well. People are whole beings. And so, for example, this summer we partnered with the Art Council, and we were able to bring live musicians to every single hot meal. And we also had a pop-up produce market that was funded by United Way, and we executed in partnership with Urban Roots London and also Turner Farms. And we had live music at every one of those pop-up markets as well. So there's nothing really like having a big lineup of people who are excited to be together. They're chatting, they're catching up, they are waiting for some help, but at the same time, they're enjoying music and having a nice experience.
Yeah. Part of the reason why we as the London Food Bank partnered with you and the other resource centers is it becomes pretty clear that, anybody looking at it, the food banks are wonderful. We appreciate the public support, but they don't get down to the granular level of where people are living. People come in, they tell us what their needs are. We provide them food hampers to do them for a number of days, and then they go on their way. That's it. And we realize if you want to fight poverty, that's not really the way to do it. That's helpful. It's great that food is being made available, but people have needs that are far greater than that. And we realize that the resource centers are really trying, just as you were referring to here, are trying to get to the whole person, to the whole family, and trying to provide the needs that are there. Do you find that hard to do? Like, it seems to me that there are so many needs out there that people have. Do you feel like you're just kind of scratching the surface, or do you really feel you're able to get down below that to where people are really at? How is it?
When we were when we were really focused on the food cupboard, and as you know, being at a food bank, it's very easy for something like a food cupboard to completely overwhelm an entire organization. And especially with the increased need that we've seen since before the pandemic, but especially in the last few months and the last year. And that's why we've been very intentional about being careful to focus on the community development aspect as well, and also to look at social capital building. So, I'm not sure if everyone knows what social capital is, but many of us, when we're facing hard times, we can go to our neighbor, we can call a family member, we have a friend that will help us out. And for people who are within the lowest income levels in our community, that's not always the case, especially because there are complex social and economic issues there, but also it might be that your neighbor just doesn't have anything to share with you because they're facing the same problems you are. And so one of our focuses has been to bring people together through things like the Crouch Block Party. Over 800 community members came out to that. And I remember the night before, I had a nightmare that it would just be me and the musicians and the volunteers. And then we got the stage set up, and then the first woman arrived before we even started and said, "I want a good seat." And then people just kept pouring and pouring in. It was a beautiful experience seeing people dance salsa together in the street. Everyone enjoyed a free meal because it was really important to us that there would be no cost to participate in any of the activities that day. And just have equal opportunity to have a good time. And what I'm seeing is that the basic needs are absolutely important, but another basic need is just feeling that you're a part of something, getting to know your neighbors, and that includes neighbors of different socioeconomic circumstances from you. And my real hope with that block party and some of the other events we've held is that next time somebody sees a neighbor, because everyone in our city is a neighbor, but especially if you're living in the same neighborhood, if they're seeing somebody who's struggling, that they won't feel threatened by them or scared of them, that they will remember seeing them dancing with them at our block party, and sharing a sandwich and really enjoying the same food. And so I think that there's a lot we can do to bring people together, and it is important to meet people's basic needs, but when we're laser focused on that, I think we miss some really important opportunities.
I've always seen the Crouch Resource Center as the little engine that could. When anybody that's down there and visiting or even goes into the library, you don't have a lot of room there, to be honest. It's really tight. And yet what you're able to do and accomplish with that is actually pretty miraculous. You unfold so many things out of there, and it's great. How do you get your funding? How does that work for a resource center?
That tiny space that you see is really critical to our operations. I kind of call it our command center or a hub. So it does act as both our food cupboard and right now our distribution site for things like the Code and Boot program, and also the Good Food Box that we have every month. Yeah. But that's where the administrative seats are. We have a lot of students that join us. And I share an office, and my desk space is Stacy Martin, who's our program director. And so when we're in there together, we're able to get a lot done. But really, that space is critical because the library has given it in kind without a charge to the organization since 1970. Wow. 50 years of in-kind space. Can't pass that up. Can't thank the London Public Library enough. And also we have use of their meeting rooms. And then the City of London has been so generous with the Hamilton Road Senior and Community Center. We run the after-school program out of that building. In the summer, we have access to what's called the Annex, which is a house that was annexed when they built the senior center, and so they let us use that spot as a home base. And then historically, Crouch has partnered with other community sites like Egerton Baptist Church. And so we also do things outside. We find space wherever we can. It is a challenge. And there are times when we have an idea and then we think, oh no, now we have to go and ask somebody again if we can use their space. But the local partners and spaces that are available have just been incredibly generous, and that's how we're able to do everything that we do.
So that institutional strength is really fundamental to you folks, right? I mean, you're right. Having that building is just a windfall in that sense.
Yes, it keeps our administrative costs very low. Yeah, that's certainly a real blessing. And in terms of how we pay for example, food, and as you know very well, food costs have just skyrocketed. Our entire community is suffering with that, and a place like a resource center is no exception. So we have a core funding from the United Way and the City of London and the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries for after school program. And then after that, we raise money through grants. It's one grant at a time. Grants are a good fit for Crouch because we apply for grants for very specific things, like to provide dairy and protein to people out of the food cupboard. We've got a really generous grant from Libro to be able to do that. TD has sponsored us to be able to provide food free of charge to all community members that come out to our events. And I mean, that's such a relief because I don't feel comfortable holding an event that excludes people because they don't have the money to participate.
Yeah.
So we write a lot of grants, that's for sure. But the funders have been generous and have really seen the need in our neighborhood. But not only the need, also I think the vision and the promise of what you can do when you're also focused on the good news stories. And there are so many of those in the Hamilton Road neighborhood.
Yeah, I'm aware of some of those, and it's awesome. But let's talk about what our life has been like recently. I mean, just this week, the Food Banks of Ontario put out a report in which they said it's getting close to a crisis situation. But one of the things that was very interesting in the report is that, 5 years ago, food bank need had kind of leveled off. It was kind of like a whole bunch of other things were happening within society that was making the need for food banks not quite as acute. But since that time, the roof has been blown off, right? And especially with the COVID stuff. So it's unfortunate, but it's the way it is. So we're facing record numbers. I'm sure you probably are too, and you can tell us about that. But one of the things that we're really trying to get through to just the public in general and to the media and others is that the food bank client is not the food bank client that was there 3-4 years ago. It might include some of them, but we've now got way more seniors coming to us. We've got way more people that are working on minimum wage. We've got people that can no longer afford rent who, the lower part of the middle class is really starting to sag and people are beginning to fall through. Is that true for you as well, as far as the people that come to you for assistance? Have you seen a real change in a similar fashion?
We have seen a change. We are seeing families and working people, certainly, also people on social assistance, but a really remarkable change we've seen is the increased number of people experiencing homelessness that we're serving. And I believe that's because they're being displaced from downtown and also they're sleeping rough in some of the local parks. We know that there are over 1,000 people experiencing homelessness in our city right now, and many of them are arriving into the Hamilton Road neighborhood, and so they're also accessing our services and especially looking for supports with things to keep them warm this winter. And we're seeing that population in numbers that we've never seen before.
Yeah. And that kind of changes the whole equation, right? Like that's the same for us. We're far more involved in those things than we were before. But it just wasn't that. It was an important issue 5 years ago, let's say, but it wasn't at the numbers or at the acute stage it is now. And I realize the city is wrestling with it, and I realize the food bank is, and that the resource centers are in the agencies. Is it your sense, though, Jen, that we're getting a handle on it, or we're not?
Oh, no. There is no handle on it. Prior to the pandemic, so in November of 2019, we were serving 326 people a month. That was like a spot in town, let's say in November. Yeah. And this month, we are up to 507 people. So that's a 62% increase. But the other thing to keep in mind is that because of the population we serve, both those experiencing homelessness and those who are in, let's say, substandard housing, they're in places like boarding houses where they don't have access, sometimes even to a fridge, but certainly they struggle with access to proper cooking facilities. So for them, coming once a month is insufficient. And that's why they're allowed to come to us every 14 days, which is still insufficient, but we can't keep our cupboard full. Last week, I know that one of our staff went to the grocery store 3 times because we ran out of food so many times. Mm-hmm. So, I think you're right that it absolutely has changed, where the food bank was meant to be a stopgap measure, an emergency measure, and people in these situations, a couple days worth of food, unless they can cook it and really make it stretch, isn't going to do what they need to survive. But really, they need more than 2 visits to us and 1 visit to the food bank in a month. And that even includes if they are on something like a Ontario Disability Support Program or an OW, because their rents are also going up. And we know that now people are struggling just to pay their rent and really have nothing left for food at the end of the day. So I wouldn't say we have a handle on this at all.
I knew you'd say that. I just wanted to hear you say it because it's so true. And for those like you who are on the front lines, you really see that. I remember when the first food bank, when we first got started, this is back in the 80s, somebody had written a book, and it was called Pay the Rent or Feed the Kids. And it was a best-selling book written by a journalist. And but, we looked at that, and that was really the case back then. Then changes had to be made. But families were facing those choices, and it was a tough choice. But now here we are again, 35 years later, and we're back in the same place. You've got people that are having to come to your place or ours or whatever it is. Their rent has really gone up, in some cases 30%, right? It's gone up so far that they just can't do that and feed the kids. And it's tough hearing those stories because for a certain period of time, we were really beginning to try to deal with some of those things, and now it's just gotten out of hand. And that was beginning to take place before the pandemic. So for politicians or others to blame the pandemic for the creation of the problem is not really there fully. I think part of it, don't you think, is that social assistance rates have been frozen in many areas or just not indexed the way that they should be. But don't you think that must be a big part of it as to why the numbers are what they are?
Yes, and you're absolutely right that this is not a new problem. In the 90s, my family went on to social assistance this very year that it became Ontario Works, and the same year that the child tax credit was cut significantly. My mom was a single mom with 5 children. I'm the oldest sibling, and we moved into the Bully Street housing complex. And I remember going to the food bank then, but I also remember various times when I'd have conversations with my mom as the oldest daughter, where she said, I don't have anything to make for supper. And I remember one time when she told me the only thing we have left are potatoes. And I said to her, that's okay, Mom, I really like potatoes. And, those are the moments that stick out. And I remember saying to my mom back then, and it makes my head shake now, why don't you budget? I was learning about budgeting in school, and I said, maybe I could sit down with you and I could help you make a budget. And, if I could go back and just give her a hug instead and say, it was an impossible situation. Absolutely impossible to feed your family. We didn't have food to take to school for lunch. We would go home for lunch and share a cucumber, share whatever my mom was able to give us. And she was able to go back to school and get a really great job and move out of that situation. But that's not everybody's reality. And I think, when I see people coming into our food cupboard, I talked to the staff about having a really high standard of customer service and remembering that we are no different, and in my case, truly, really no different from every single person that walks through that door. And it is so hard to ask for help. It's hard to know that you can't feed yourself, never mind your children. And, we shouldn't be here. Like I was, let's say 12, I think, when we moved into that housing complex. I'm 39 now, and we're talking about the same issues, but I really believe that they've gotten worse instead of better.
So when we're talking social assistance rates and things like that, and those having to be kept up to what they need to be, we understand that. What else do you think? What else do you think needs to happen out there besides just that to change things? So what would you see it from the street level? What would you encourage, whether it's politicians or the rest of us?
Well, I think we need to be realistic and change the way we're thinking about food services such as a food bank and community food cupboards, or sometimes they're called emergency food cupboards, because we are not any longer coping with one-off emergencies. Yeah. Really, we're keeping people alive at this point. And to rely on food cupboards or food banks to survive the month, but that's the reality that we're facing. And, we're talking about our healthcare system. It feels like it's collapsing, especially if you're on Twitter, but also if you're a parent with your child in an emergency room or you're a senior waiting for a long-term care bed. But also, nutrition is right at the baseline of being well and of your health. And so I don't think that we can be expected to hold up our community out of a little cupboard in a library or even out of your big food bank site on Leithorn Street without additional support, and also without rethinking this idea that we're places where people stop in here and there when they need us. Because that's not the reality these people are in right now, and it's not the reality that they're going to be in for the foreseeable future. So we need additional resources, but I think we also need to value these services differently in our community, and that includes at the government level.
Yeah. For me, I think I agree with all of what you said, but I also think there has to be a real restructuring of our economy. You hear this all the time, and, when people say, well, look at the stock market, it's booming away. Or you look at London, and it's building all of these new houses out in the periphery and everything else. And meanwhile, we've got middle-class homelessness. We've got large populations of homeless people. It's like there is this economy, and then there's the real economy where the majority of people are living. And somehow the funds are not able to be transferred from that one economy to this economy. And as a result, some really, really, really flourish and do really well. And the rest are falling down and are really having difficulty. And it would seem to me that especially the economists and the politicians have a responsibility to look at that and say, if we keep going down this road, right, where there's so much in the way of funds, we have the 10th largest economy in the world, right? $2 trillion of money is generated by Canada. If we can't get it to the average community, the average neighborhood, so that people can live without having to go to a resource center or to a food bank, then it's not going to work anyway. And it seems to me that the future for you, for me, for all of the others that are out there trying to help as much as we can, and I just know how much you must have to work, Jennifer. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse because people up in a whole other area looking at the economy are not making those structural adjustments that are necessary. I don't see, from my own knowledge of talking to those folks, a real willingness to tackle the economy that way. I also see that within cities, it's very, very hard for them because they're kind of the runt of the litter, if you know what I mean. They don't have the resources the province or the feds do. So if that does keep happening and things continue to get worse and worse for us, which right now seems to be what's going to happen, do you make plans for those kind of things, or do you just kind of live day by day and just see what you can do? Like, surely you can see the future as well as I do. How do you plan for it?
We're asking the hard-hitting questions.
Sorry.
Well, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I think when you're working at the neighborhood level, we have a responsibility to meet people where they're at in the day-to-day. We want ultimately, and even in the short to mid-term, to help people with income stability. And, we do that through things like helping them file their taxes. There are people who haven't filed their taxes in 10 years because they're so nervous to do so or they don't know how. And then it turns out that they're owed thousands and thousands of dollars in government support. So, first we need to get people the resources that are there for them, but we know that those are insufficient. And I agree that sometimes it feels like our world is collapsing around us, and something has to change. But and so I think that we do need to be doing a better job of advocating, of telling stories that affect policy change. We know that statistics can only take us so far, and that it's really narratives and mobilizing those narratives that create more profound change. Yeah. So that's something that we can work on together, and also through organizations like Community Food Centers Canada. They're pretty tremendous advocates. But at the same time, we need to support people where they're at today, and they're really seriously hungry. Nobody's going to the food bank and to a food cupboard in the same month because it's fun for them. The humility that we see, the gratitude that we see. And I often tell people who are nervous around people who are living in poverty or who are experiencing homelessness, these are the kindest people that I interact with on a daily basis. Many of them have learned my name, have learned the name of all of the staff. They say thank you more than I hear at any other place or time in my life. So I think it's looking at people differently, looking at them as people, and that sounds simple, but we're not doing well at that as a society. And making sure that we're really keeping people alive, and even better, keeping them healthy, because the long-term impact of not doing that adequately is a further burden on our healthcare system, which already is totally maxed out, and really a feeling of desperation that I think is creeping into different levels of society that wasn't feeling it before. And as a whole community, we're really going to start to feel that.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing up the advocacy piece, because that's just going to have to start happening more and more. We've only got a couple of minutes left, Jennifer. How do you stay inspired? How do you keep encouraged? Being at the front lines, it's got to be tough. How do you do it?
Well, the last year, through all of our community events and community development activities, that has been inspiring, especially seeing people who I knew previously through our basic needs services bring forward ideas. And then when we help them make those ideas happen and see them playing leadership roles and, smiling, and they love coming to help out, and they thank us for just having them there and for letting them play a role in making the community a better place. And we have built some really good energy at a time when that's tough. And when I see musicians who are also trying to make a living, and there was one particular moment at Hot Meal when we had a musician, Jason Mercer, he came to play, thanks to the London Art Council, and a community member stopped by and said, "I've always wanted to learn to play the guitar. How did you do that?" And then another woman stopped and said, "Did you know that I'm a songwriter?" And there was a man that people would often see downtown, and I'm sure everyone's seen him at least once. And he was in the library the other day, and I mentioned to someone that he's really a prolific songwriter. He pulled out a stack like this of songs, said he had written one that morning, and then I asked if he already had a melody for it, and he said, "Yes, would you like me to sing it?" And he stopped in the library and sang the most beautiful song that he wrote himself that day. And there are so many of these moments of really celebrating who people are beyond their basic needs that's what keeps me going. And I think we need the food piece. We need the hygiene items. We need to keep people warm, but we also need to really celebrate who they are.
That's beautiful, that's personal, and that's quite profound, Jennifer. I really appreciate you bringing that up. You're one of the true community champions out there. You're as I said, at that granular level. You're in the trenches. You're doing what you can in a small space. You've really become creative and really quite ingenious in the way that you've done it. Thank you for that. And even from the food bank, thank you for being able to take the food supplies that people donate to us. We just don't want to give it to people to help them move forward. They have other needs, and it's people like you and your staff and your volunteers and Hamilton Road Senior Center and the library and the others. You've done so much that way to actually give people more than just the food. You put all the care and all the skills that come with it. I really see you as part of that whole network. It doesn't stop at the food bank with somebody getting food. It really has to go a lot farther, and you folks take it that way. So thank you for that. Thanks for doing this today. I think it's important that people know that little jewel there on Hamilton Road is doing as much as it is. And thanks for your leadership in it all, Jennifer.
Thank you too, Glenn. And thanks for being a visionary that has helped to decentralize the food bank a little bit, and for coming right into the Hamilton Road neighborhood. We get rave reviews about the mobile food bank. People are so happy that it's there. They're relieved that they don't have the additional burden of traveling outside of the neighborhood. So it's been great to work with you, and I know we'll just be doing more together in the future.
We'll just keep the partnership going. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now